Tracy Sable tonight on EWTN News Nightly, headed to Hawaii. President Joe Biden makes an announcement as the recovery continues following deadly wildfires. Asking questions, how lawmakers are responding after the Biden administration pledges billions more to Ukraine. Attacking the faithful, why an angry mob burned down 3 Christian churches in Pakistan. Plus, full speed ahead. The Holy Father will be staying busy as the Synod draws closer. We have a report from Rome. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on the Feast of St. Stephen of Hungary. Breaking news tonight, new restrictions have been placed on access to the widely used abortion drug mifepristone. 3 judges on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals issued the ruling today. It says the abortion drug can only be administered through the 7th week of pregnancy. Right now, it is allowed up until 10 weeks. The court also said mifepristone must be administered in the presence of a physician. The drug will also not be available by mail. The case appears likely headed to the Supreme Court. An appeals court has sided with pro-lifers in a case in Washington, D.C. The ruling says the city treated pro-lifers more harshly than activists for Black Lives Matter, adding the D.C. government, quote, picked winners and losers in public debates. In the summer of 2020, 2 pro-lifers were arrested for writing slogans in chalk on the sidewalk. Our President Joe Biden celebrates the 1-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act, but Americans aren't exactly in a celebratory mood with inflation still hurting families. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, in a speech today, President Joe Biden said he is not declaring victory on the economy, adding there's more work to do and that things are turning around. His critics contend otherwise.
In the East Room of the White House, President Joe Biden gathers with supporters to celebrate the first anniversary of his signature climate, healthcare, and tax law, the Inflation Reduction Act.
And one of the most significant laws I think has ever been enacted, taking on the special interest and winning and winning.
The White House says inflation has cooled over the past year, but the Republican National Committee sees it much differently, tweeting today, since Biden took office, prices are up 16.9%, real wages are down 3%, and gas is up $1.48 per gallon. Credit card debt is at a record high. 20 million households are behind on their utility bills. The list goes on. Meanwhile, Hawaii, where the death toll is climbing from the wildfires on Maui. Recovery efforts underway to find and identify those who lost their lives. President Biden and the First Lady will fly to Maui Monday to view the destruction and meet with survivors. In the press briefing room, FEMA with this update.
This is a really hard disaster, and this is a really difficult search operation.
Also today, former Vice President Mike Pence, currently running for president, tells an audience in Indianapolis,
despite what the former president and his allies have said for now more than 2.5 years, and continue to insist to this very hour, the Georgia election was not stolen, and I had no right to overturn the election on January 6th.
Tomorrow, President Biden heads to Scranton, Pennsylvania. That's where he'll pay his respects to former Pennsylvania First Lady Ellen Casey, who recently passed away at the age of 91. There will be a viewing at St. Peter's Cathedral. And also on the president's schedule tomorrow, a trip to Camp David. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, there is a major spending battle brewing on Capitol Hill when Congress returns next month. President Biden is asking for billions more in new emergency spending. However, half of that money is for Ukraine, and that is becoming a major flashpoint for some Republican lawmakers. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales joins us now with more. Eric.
Yeah, that is correct, Tracy. You know, President Biden wants $40 billion more money for border security and disaster relief, but more than half that, $24 billion, going to the war effort in Ukraine. But there is growing opposition among rank-and-file House Republicans to funnel more money into the war, which is now totaling more than $100 billion overall.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, a longtime critic of Ukraine aid, tweeted, quote, "We should only be funding money to help Americans with disaster relief, not forced to vote to fund Ukraine at the same time. Separate the funds because I'm not voting to send more money to a foreign war to kill more people. This is ridiculous." Congressman Chip Roy agrees this should be a non-starter for the House GOP. It's time to stand up for Americans and against the uniparty. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is a staunch supporter of more Ukraine aid and wants to increase defense spending as well.
What the debt ceiling deal produced is inadequate for the Defense Department. How to get additional assistance is a challenge. We'll have at some point Ukraine supplemental.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy says the House will not exceed budget caps set by the debt limit deal for any emergency spending. But Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer wrote, quote, "The latest request from the Biden administration shows America's continued commitment to helping our friends abroad and should send a clear signal to Russian President Vladimir Putin, the Chinese government, and others of America's resolve when it comes to defending democracy around the world." And the Pentagon says any aid given to Russia supports an unjust war in Ukraine.
We've made concerns to other countries that want to provide support to Russia that, we certainly discourage that. I think what's important is that we are going to continue our support for Ukraine, as you've heard the president say, for as long as it takes.
House Republicans, mainly those in the Freedom Caucus, tell me that they can attach disaster relief funds to any short-term spending bill in the future come October and add that they want Ukraine stripped out of any sort of continuing resolution. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
And joining us now is Tom Bevan, president of Real Clear Politics. Tom, great to be with you as always. A lot to get to, but first, let's talk about this money earmarked for new emergency spending. The bone of contention for some Republicans is that additional funding for Ukraine, $24 billion more. Tom, how do you think voters view this? I mean, do you think they're still on board with funding this war, or do you think that their support is waning, especially as we're faced with disasters here at home, like the devastating wildfires in Hawaii?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the polling data, I think, shows that people still generally support the war in Ukraine, although that number has been dropping, and it is obviously split along partisan lines. Democrats still very much support it. Republicans very much do not, and independents are kind of in the middle. So, I think it's going to be tough to get Republicans on board with this, particularly in the House and the Senate. They're a little bit more in favor of it. So it's going to be a battle. But I think by and large, the country's fairly split on Ukraine in terms of they want to support it, but with inflation and the amount of money that's being spent, it's becoming more and more of an issue.
Yeah, I want to get to some new polling data, too. President Biden's job approval is on the decline and now sits at 41.1%, according to the Real Clear Politics average. Tom, what do you think is behind this drop in support for Biden?
Well, his support has actually been bouncing around, 41, 42 for a long time. The lowest he's ever been in our Real Clear Politics average is about 37.5, and that was some time ago. So he's kind of at a floor there. And again, Democrats supporting him 75, 80, 85% of the time. Think he's doing a good job. Republicans are in the teens, if not in the single digits. And so the movement is really among independents, and that kind of goes up and down depending. But lately he's had a bit of a rough go. Again, the economy is the number one issue by far on the minds of all Americans. And his approval rating on the economy, on inflation in particular, is in the low 30s. And so I think that's what's really driving his low approval ratings and keeping them low for some time.
Yeah, and it seems he is, polling, though, slightly ahead of former President Trump. And if the two were matched up against each other again in a general election, that is. Your thoughts on that, Tom? And do you think this could be a rematch between Biden and Trump in 2024, despite all the controversy surrounding both of these candidates?
I cannot tell you how many times I get that question when I'm out, Tracy. It's what everyone wants to know. Is this really going to happen again? Given that, I think, both candidates have their flaws, and it would be a very close race from all the indications. Right now, as you mentioned, Biden is leading Trump, but I think it's like less than a percentage point in our Real Clear Politics average nationally. But this race is going to come down to all those same swing states that were on the table last time: Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. And it would be a very, very close, hard-fought battle all the way. So, look, unless and until I see something in the numbers that shows that President Trump is suffering a drop in support, he is the heavy favorite to win on the Republican side. And unless and until the Democrats come up with some way to, if they want to get Biden off the ticket at some point because of his age or the Hunter Biden issue, that's going to be a heavy lift for them as well. So right now, we're proceeding as if it's going to be a rematch of 2020.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit more about former President Trump. This time, though, that latest indictment, the fourth one in just the past couple of months. This one has to do with alleged election interference in the 2020 presidential race in Georgia. Kind of hard to keep up with all these, Tom. That said, how does President Trump, how does he bounce back from all of this?
Well, I mean, it's never really slowed him down in the first place. I mean, he just continues to plow through. We haven't gotten any data yet because this is so recent on this, whether this is, will cause any sort of a dent in his support, certainly in the Republican base, but there's no evidence that that's going to be the case. It hasn't happened so far. I don't expect it to happen this time. The question is, will this affect him in a general election? I know that the Fulton County DA just asked for a trial date of March 4th. Of next year. That is the day before Super Tuesday, the biggest day in the primary calendar. So it's hard to see this as anything outside of the realm of politics. And certainly on the Republican side, people look at this, even people who aren't huge supporters of Donald Trump, and think that it's there's a lot of politics involved.
Yeah, and timing is all very curious as well. We have about a minute or so left, Tom. What else are you following?
Well, we have just had a reporter out at the Iowa State Fair, where obviously it's still going on, but most of the fireworks there are over. And obviously we are gearing up for next week's Republican debate. The first debate is in Milwaukee. The big question is Donald Trump going to be there? He hasn't given any indication that he's going to be there yet, but you never know. He wasn't scheduled to be at the fair either, and he sort of parachuted in dramatically at the last minute. So we're keeping tabs on that, and we'll be there to cover it for Real Clear Politics next week.
All right. Always great to talk to you. Thanks so much, Tom, for your insights. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tracy. Yep.
Well, the state of Texas wants Planned Parenthood to give back millions of dollars. At issue is money that the nation's largest abortion provider received for services prior to being removed from the state's Medicaid program in 2021. Most abortions have been outlawed in Texas since Roe v. Wade was overturned last year. Earlier this week, a judge held a hearing on the case but did not immediately issue a ruling. And in New Jersey, the state Supreme Court says Catholic schools can require teachers to follow church moral teaching. The unanimous ruling was in response to a case where a Catholic school did not renew the contract of a teacher after she violated its code of conduct regarding premarital sex. And we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including angry reaction. We'll tell you what led a mob of people to attack several Christian churches and destroy a home in Pakistan. And a closer look at a case involving free speech in Mexico. Well, the global governing body for swimming is set to allow transgender participants in an event in October. World Aquatics has created what it is calling an open category for swimmers at a World Cup meet in Germany. Last year, the group effectively banned transgender athletes from participating in women's events. A scary scene in Pakistan as a Muslim mob attacked a Christian colony after allegations a resident had desecrated a copy of the Quran. Rioters burned several churches and demolished a man's house. Police used batons to disperse the crowd. Officials say that they are looking for the accused man who could face the death penalty under Pakistan's blasphemy laws. Well, a civil society leader in Mexico has been found guilty of gender-based political violence. This after he went on social media and described a transgender lawmaker as, quote, a man who self-ascribes as a woman. As part of the verdict, Rodrigo Ivan Cortes was placed on the National Registry of Offenders. He was also ordered to complete reparation measures, including daily social media apologies. And joining us now is Congressman Cortes and his legal counsel, Julio Pohl of Alliance Defending Freedom International. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here. First off, Rodrigo, I want to get your reaction to last week's verdict. And did you ever think that your social media post would garner so much attention and controversy?
Definitely not. This is so unjust because this agreement is not discrimination or violence. The law in Mexico is being weaponized and weaponized to chill speech that threatens the advances of a very radical political agenda in my country. I has been convicted of violence when in reality, it's my opponents that have repeatedly brought chaos and unrest to Mexico's political institutions.
And Julio, I want to go to you next. I mean, what message do you think the Mexican judiciary is sending with their verdict? And why does there seem to be such a crackdown on free speech in this country right now?
With this decision, the electoral court and Mexican courts in general are emitting this message that censoring and silencing is okay, that you cannot express your views. And this is very threatening for democracy in Mexico, but in all the world in general.
And tell us about these reparations that the Supreme Chamber ordered Rodrigo to make. I mean, I know, as we mentioned, it tells him making daily apologies on social media, but I'm curious, I mean, how can they compel him to do that? And then what happens if he doesn't fulfill those orders?
Well, I think the Mexican court has created, out of nothing, a mandatory incriticability that cancels parliamentary debate, public debate, freedom of expression, and religious freedom, dismantling democracy and imposing an ideological thought without any scientific or legal basis. I see a clear pattern here. It's not only my case. A member of the regime goes to the National Electoral Institute, and this one takes the case to the Electoral Court. With this pattern, 2 cardinals, 3 bishops, 2 priests, and 2 members of Congress has been sentenced. So the fundamental freedoms are greatly threatened in Mexico by the gender confusion ideology and an authoritarian regime.
And Julio, I want you to jump in here just a minute. I mean, what can happen to him legally, to Rodrigo, if he doesn't fulfill, these reparations?
So, as you said, he's compelled to express himself in public social media. 30 days with a drafted apology that was drafted by the court was completely compelling him to speak. And if he does not comply, so all the avenues are now closed in Mexico. So that's why ADF International continues supporting him. It's bringing this case to the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights. He can be threatened in Mexico in different ways with sanctions, economical sanctions, as the one he has already received.
Rodrigo, we're almost out of time, but I want to ask you before we wrap this up, tell us how this has all impacted you personally and professionally, and what are your plans moving forward?
Well, this is shocking to tell the truth without any violence, and this sanction for telling the truth is not something that you expect from your country, for your government. So we are trying to find out how to still saying the truth and not be convicted again. So there is some unrest in this, but we are trying to keep this fight for saying the truth peacefully.
Well, gentlemen, thank you both for coming on. We appreciate it, and we're going to continue following this case. Thank you so much. God bless. Up next on EWTN News Nightly, outreach to Africa. The Vatican Secretary of State visits war-torn South Sudan. Well, the Archdiocese of San Antonio has removed 2 priests from its ministry. This after they were credibly accused of child sexual abuse. Both are prohibited from wearing clerical clothing and using clerical titles. The head of the Archdiocese thanked the survivors for coming forward. While the Vatican Secretary of State is in South Sudan, Cardinal Pietro Parolin is meeting with people who are fleeing the violence in neighboring Sudan. He says the 4-day visit to East Africa is, quote, an extension of the love and care Pope Francis has for the people of South Sudan. Well, as part of the vacation calendar in Italy, the Holy Father did not hold his usual Wednesday talk with pilgrims at the Vatican today. But Pope Francis is definitely keeping a busy schedule. Later this month, the Holy Father will travel to Mongolia for his 43rd apostolic journey. And in September, he will be in France for a quick trip. EWTN Vatican News Correspondent Colm Flynn has more.
A very good evening, Tracy. Well, this morning, Pope Francis did not have his usual Wednesday general audience as the Vatican is on a summer break with many activities suspended. However, the Pope did hold a special Angelus for the Feast of the Assumption, which was yesterday. And at 86 years of age, the Pope still has a very busy schedule for the weeks ahead. You'll remember he was at World Youth Day in Lisbon just 2 weeks ago, and now he is preparing for his upcoming trips to Mongolia and then to Marseille in France. Pope Francis is due to travel to Mongolia in East Asia between August the 31st and September the 4th, which will make him the first Pope in history to visit the country. It's below Russia and above China and has only around 1,400 Catholics in the entire country. The majority of the people are Buddhists. And it's very interesting, Tracy, that Pope Francis is deciding to go now to Mongolia at a time of strained relations between the Vatican and both of its neighbors, Russia and China. It's unclear if this trip has some sort of diplomatic purpose with those two superpowers, but that remains to be seen. And actually, next week, I'll be flying to Mongolia to produce a report for EWTN News in Depth about the state of the Catholic Church there and how preparations are going ahead of the Pope's visit. After Mongolia, the Pope will travel to Marseille in France, where he will participate in a meeting of Catholic bishops from the Mediterranean region. He will be there for just 2 days, and on the second day in Marseille, he will meet with the bishops, and then late that afternoon, he will celebrate Mass in the city's soccer stadium. That's your update for just now. In Rome, Colm Flynn for EWTN News Nightly.
And finally tonight, there were celebrations around the world yesterday in honor of the solemnity of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And here at EWTN, we had our own celebration, including a blessing of the newsroom. The EWTN News team celebrated Mass in our temporary chapel. Afterwards, a procession was led by Father John Pohl of the Franciscan Missionaries of the Eternal Word. The entire DC Bureau also was blessed with the true presence of Jesus for Eucharistic adoration. And we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, now known as X, and Instagram as EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.